Lord Falconer.
I was just getting ready to relax for 2
minutes. I
minutes.
know, you were relaxing, and now we were like, bring you on, because,
okay.
As is ever the case, the government minister has knocked out our timing. Now, I'd like to know your response to this front page story involving Lizz Truss. She's talking about how Trussonomics wasn't a bad thing. Perhaps the execution could have been better, but actually she's not really issuing so much as a mea culpa here, as a defence of her own economic policy. Do you buy it?
No, I don't, and I think she was fundamentally wrong in her economic policy. What she was saying was cut taxes and growth will go up. And the OBR made it clear the growth that would be obtained by her tax reductions would be some minuscule amount that would be completely eroded as far as individual members of the public were concerned by the massive increase in their, for example, mortgage rates. What I worry about is presumably Liz Truss is a powerful voice in the Tory party. The Sunday Telegraph has devoted pages and pages to this. Rishi Sunak is a weak Prime Minister. He hasn't got control of his party. If she represents a powerful force, are we going to have deluded Trussonomics again as informing the way that this government, the Sunak government, runs the economy? And look at Shapps, who've just, sorry, I apologise, Mr. Grant Shapps.
Yes.
I mean, he didn't disown her in any way.
But she makes a point, doesn't she, about this stagnation and the idea that successive governments, including the one that you were involved in, have not been able to push growth higher because of this idea of Treasury orthodoxy, that the markets are going to balk at anything a bit more economically creative.
So does that mean you do the wrong thing? Is that the idea? You do a thing that completely crashes the economy.
Are you happy with the tax burden right now, Lord Falconer, on the public?
No,
it's rising to what, 37.5% of GDP?
Everybody wants it to come down, but only when we can afford it.
So are you going to cap taxes or cap
spending
when we can afford it?
Only when we can afford it.
But why aren't you ever giving any flesh on the bones of any of your own economic policies? You stand from the sidelines, and this is what the viewers think, and you throw stones, and yet we haven't heard anything particularly concrete or cogent from either Keir Starmer or Rachel Reeves. What are Labour's plans to solve this stagnation crisis?
First of all, we're going to boost the economy with £28 billion spent on a whole range of changes that will improve the climate change issues, the environmental issues, and they will not only do that, they will also bring a massive boost to the economy, but not a boost that only helps the rich, and not a boost which makes the market, which I noticed that Liz Truss is now calling the market some conspiracy of lefties, which seems to me to be mad.
Well, the anti-growth coalition, I think, is how she referred to them.
Could I look at your headline? Truss, I was brought down by the, quote, left wing.
Economic establishment.
Are these the people who own bonds? Is that what she had in mind?
Well, I think she's talking about the blob, which may be left-leaning.
Can I mention one other thing?
Yes, please do.
What does it tell you about Liz Truss? Is it not that she was more concerned about how she is to be remembered rather than what's best for the economy? So you've got...
Or she's just making an alternative economic argument. Let's get on to other matters.
OK, fair enough.
I'm interested, because of you having been a former Justice Secretary, what you think of Dominic Raab, your successor, whether he should have stood aside while this investigation was carried out, or do you agree with Mr Shapps that everyone's innocent until proven guilty, which as a legal man you'll probably agree with?
Well, everybody's innocent until proven guilty, but you've also got to deal with the practical issue. If serious allegations are made, and, for example, it is said that somebody might be intimidating staff, you've got to work out, until you discover whether the person has done it or not, what's the safest course, because you might be found at the end of the day to have done it.
Have you had any dealings with him? How did you find him?
I find him perfectly OK when I meet him. We're now at a point, I think, where we've only got a few days or a few weeks to go before Mr Adam Tolley of King's Counsel determines whether or not the allegations are true and what should be done. But is it a little bit late to be talking now about suspension? Because maybe it's next week, I just don't know.
But have we got a problem with senior politicians speaking robustly to members of staff and civil servants, and a degree of what Jacob Rees-Mogg has described as snowflakery creeping in?
Yeah, well,
I mean, do you worry that they can't cope with firm direction?
Well, doesn't it depend on the facts? So people should be able to say to the people who are working for them, this is what I want to be clear about it, I'll treat you with respect, but I expect delivery. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and if I'm not getting delivery, I say, look, this is not good enough. That is different from picking on junior members of staff, humiliating them and making their life absolutely hell.
Allegedly.
I'm not saying that's what Mr Raab was doing. I'm saying that's where the line sort of falls one way or the other, you can't determine what happened in an individual case, hence Mr Tolley looking at it.
You were flatmates with Tony Blair back in the day, and you would have been very familiar with the tactics of the likes of, say, Alastair Campbell, who wasn't afraid of expressing an opinion pretty robustly.
But I'm not afraid of... Are you complaining about that?
No, I'm not complaining about that. We like to hear your opinions.
We
like opinions.
We
but
like
what
you
I'm saying
because you
is,
express opinions robustly.
Indeed so.
And that's okay.
Indeed so, robustly but politely. But I think
Alastair was not remotely a bully in any way.
Right. OK. But he did express himself pretty robustly with staff,
Well,
is my understanding. All right, well, this is where I'm saying. That's where the line is drawn.
Well, interesting enough,
and maybe people back in his day might have taken his direction and his directness perhaps in a more convivial spirit than
this is a complete red herring. I mean, Alastair was very popular with his stuff.
Yes.
He was somebody who was respected as being fair. Yes, he wanted high standards from his staff. Everybody should want high standards from the people who work for them. That's not bullying. What is bullying is treating people unfairly, where people don't feel safe with their... And I'm not saying that's what happened with Dominic Raab. What I'm saying is Mr Tolley has got to work out what was actually happening. And if he was vile to the staff and made them feel terrified, then it's a horrible thing to do. He shouldn't be the Justice Secretary. But equally, it meant he wasn't getting the best out of the civil service, which is what you need.
As we've just been talking about Blair and that Blair-Campbell era, do you worry that Keir Starmer doesn't quite have his charisma and can't take people over the top as Blair did in 1997?
Blair was a very exceptional sort of politician, and there aren't very many of them. And if you look back over the last sort of 30 or 40 years, maybe one or two in all of that period. But that does not mean that Keir does not reflect and connect with what the public are feeling about.
But did the public connect with him as easily as they did with Blair?
Well, Tony had an exceptional ability to connect with the public. Keir is in a different position and at a different time. A different position because he's been in opposition over a long period of time. He's got to get to a point where the public have made up their mind whether they want to change the government. So I think it's a different sort of period. Tony became the leader of the opposition at a point where the Tory government was already discredited. Keir became the leader of the opposition after Boris Johnson won a massive landslide. He, over time, has built a position where he is now 20 percentage points ahead in the opinion poll. He's done it by quietly being in the right place.
Hasn't he just done it on the back of Tory failures?
Well, that's obviously had a large part to do with it. But the public are willing to trust him as a potential Prime Minister. Talking
of the public, we've got some really interesting polling from the public and GB viewers about Brexit, and 49% of them don't think it's gone well. How does Labour handle Brexit? Because we heard David Lammy give a speech in which he talked about returning to a situation of alignment with the EU, which will be anathema to people in the Red Wall, let's be honest. What's your view on how Brexit's gone and how Labour should handle this issue moving forward?
Brexit has taken place. I think the last thing the public want is any sort of rerunning of the Brexit issue. We've decided to Brexit. We've done it. We've now got to make it work. So I'm strongly against any suggestion of going back into the European Union, going back into the single market, having a rerun of the referendum. But of course, we should do as much as we can to be as close to our European allies as we can be. I don't think the Conservative Brexiteers were saying we're enemies of Europe.
No.
And quite separately, we want to trade with Europe. They're one of our major competitors and trading partners. So we need to work as hard as we can with the European Union to reduce trade barriers as much as possible. I think if Labour becomes the government, then I suspect the Europeans will think, look, we can have a much more grown-up and sensible conversation about...
The European Union might be rubbing their hands together with glee because Sir Keir Starmer, in his capacity as shadow Brexit secretary, did as much as he could to frustrate the Brexit process.
But Sir Keir Starmer, in his capacity as leader of the opposition, has made it clear that we accept Brexit. There's no going back. But surely we should have as friendly a relationship as possible and one that reduces trade barriers as much as possible without giving back control to the European Commission and the European Union, which was what so much irked so many people. And I just don't think the Europeans think the Conservatives are serious about all of this. And no doubt the European bureaucrats in the European Union to be opening their Sunday Telegraph this morning and saying, good God, Liz Truss is back.
I know. There's always a room for a political comeback, as you well know, Lord
Indeed.
Falconer. Thank you very, very much for
Thank
joining me
you.
in the studio this morning.